Okay, so this is not really a theory about Marvel Cinematic Universe so much as it is a hypothesis about Marvel Cinematic Universe. You could call it a theory, however, about moral philosophy. This is very much a theory about moral philosophy. It's the theory that the major traditions of ethics, the deontological tradition, the virtue ethics tradition, and the utilitarian tradition are largely, maybe not entirely, but largely consistent, and not only consistent, but integratable, and that they need to be integrated. And the hypothesis is that this is illustrated in Marvel Cinematic Universe in the characters of Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America. So these are the three major moral traditions, at least in Western philosophy, and these are the three major characters of the MCU, at least in the Infinity Saga, the first 20-something films. Now, there will be some spoilers here. If you haven't seen Endgame or some of the other films, you might not want to watch this if spoilers bother you. Maybe spoilers about moral philosophy, which are very good. Learn now that these things are so regarding the traditions of moral philosophy. Don't be afraid of these spoilers. They're good for you. So let's summarize what these traditions are first. Virtue ethics is the tradition in moral philosophy that emphasizes the proper function of the human being, and that emphasizes happiness, and we attain happiness according to virtue ethics by functioning properly as human beings. Deontology is the tradition in moral philosophy that emphasizes duty and obligations and our intentions. And utilitarianism is the tradition in moral philosophy that emphasizes the results of our actions and that emphasizes happiness. And you can make a nice summary of these positions, of these traditions in moral thought, according to what these concepts are and where they fit. Specifically, each of them has a strategy and a goal, or a means and an end. The goal of utilitarian ethics is the greatest possible happiness. The strategy is to focus on the results as a way of understanding whether actions are right or wrong. The goal of virtue ethics is, again, to be happy, but with a particular understanding of happiness. Happiness is what happens when we function properly as human beings, according to our nature as human beings. And this goal is achieved by focusing on character. The deontological tradition focuses on intentions or motives. The goal is to follow moral law, to satisfy our obligations. The means is a way of knowing what is the difference between right and wrong. The goal is what we're really trying to accomplish in ethics, to satisfy our moral obligations. Deontology, to achieve the greatest possible happiness. Utilitarianism, to function properly as human beings and find ourselves happy by doing so in virtue ethics. Although there are various philosophers representing these traditions, John Rawls is associated with deontology, and Aquinas is a virtue ethicist, and Peter Singer and Bentham and Sidgwick are utilitarians, and so on. Three major characters representing these traditions, and I think these are the major characters representing these traditions, at least in the West. And in Eastern philosophy, Confucius is a superb virtue ethicist. But in Western philosophy, Aristotle represents virtue ethics, Kant represents deontology, John Stuart Mill represents utilitarianism. And now my suggestion, hypothesis, theory, if you want to call it that, is that Thor represents virtue ethics, Captain America represents deontology, and Iron Man represents utilitarianism. Now understand, with respect to virtue ethics, that it is about the proper function of the human being, and many of these things are universal for all human beings. The virtue ethicist will describe virtues like wisdom, courage, justice, moderation in the classic set of four cardinal virtues that the Greeks talked about, and Aristotle gives his more extended list of other virtues. And if you study Christian medieval virtue ethics, Aristotle is developed by Aquinas in a Christian direction, or you could say Aquinas baptizes Aristotle as Augustine baptizes Plato. If you follow this, you'll find another set of virtues: faith, hope, and love. The three theological virtues are also very important. And these things are universal. Every human being needs faith, hope, love, wisdom, courage, justice, moderation to function properly, to be happy human beings. But virtue ethics understand is also about the function of the human individual in society, where that individual fits in society. Virtue ethics typically has a social context and understands human beings according to their social context. The proper function of a human being as such is going to be pretty much the same for all human beings. But I myself, I am not just a human being. I'm also husband, father, teacher, and I run this YouTube channel. And the virtues of a person with these positions in life, these occupations, these particular obligations, this particular location in the structure of society, the virtues of such a person are in some cases going to be a bit different than the virtues for someone else. So a virtuous teacher and a virtuous student are not exactly the same thing. Although I think the best teachers probably began as the best students. The virtues of a teacher and the virtues of a student, the role of both of them are not quite the same. And a virtuous student is not going to act quite the same as a virtuous character. Now, I suggest that Thor can be understood as following a particular variety of virtue ethics. Actually, not a very strong understanding of the proper function of the human being, or in his case, the Asgardian being, or more generally, the proper function of a rational being in this particular galaxy. With more specificity for this species. Thor is actually a little more specific than that. He's looking at the specific social role. He thinks his purpose is to fulfill the role of a hero and the role of a prince or the role of a king. And, you know, he wants the role of a king, and then he doesn't want the role of a king, and then the role of a king is forced on him, and then the role of a king doesn't seem to suit him very well. But he's always interested in the role of the hero. And he's very sad when he can't fulfill that role. When he fails to destroy Thanos before Thanos destroys half the universe, he is very sad about it and literally, apparently, depressed for 5 years about this. And I think that's because he has a particular understanding of what is right and wrong. He thinks what tells him how he should live is what his social obligations are. How does he put it in Ragnarok? That's what heroes do. That's how he knows what his job is, because that's how he knows what he's supposed to do, morally speaking. Moral behavior for Thor is what heroes do, because that's what he is. He's a hero. He has to fulfill that role. And so, you know, in Endgame, his mother will give him some advice about not allowing social expectations of your particular role in society to determine everything about how you should live and where you should find your understanding of your own value. And I think there's more to it than that. There's more to Thor's growth than that. I'm going to look not in that direction, but in the direction of Thor taking on a few characteristics of the Deontologist and of the Utilitarian. But first, let's overview who Captain America is. Captain America is a Deontologist. His understanding of what is right and what is wrong is entirely determined by obligations. He has a really strong sense of duty. You know, he's the soldier. He understands what his obligations are, and that tells him pretty much everything he needs to know about how he should live. You know, you can never fail in doing your duty, or at least doing your best to do your duty. And if you fail to achieve the goal of your actions when you're doing your duty, or if you should die in the process, no problem, because the important thing was to do your duty. And Iron Man is utilitarian. This one scene in Avengers, Marvel's Avengers, the first one of the 4 Avengers films, at least at the time of the making of this video, there are only 4. And in the first of these, of Marvel's Avengers, they're on the helicarrier, and spoiler, if you don't know, Phil Coulson has been killed by Loki. Iron Man, the utilitarian, who will justify every action by his understanding of how it will contribute to the greater good. Iron Man, the utilitarian, says Phil Coulson was stupid because he went and got himself killed fighting Loki. Captain America thinks what Phil Coulson just did was perfect. It's exactly the right thing to do. He did his duty to fight Loki best he could, and if he dies in the process, that's not a problem. That's a reason to praise him, not critique him. He's not stupid. He's noble. What was right for him to do was to fulfill his duty, you know, defend Earth from Loki, and dying in the process is not a problem. You can never fail to do what is right if you're doing your duty. You can never fail you can never fail at what you're trying to do if you've done your duty, even if you fail. What you really need to do is do your duty, which means, in this case, for Coulson, fight Loki best you can. And if you fail at defeating Loki, you haven't failed morally. You failed at defeating Loki, but you've succeeded morally if you've done your duty. That's how Captain America thinks of these things. This is a deontological pattern of thinking. Duty and noble intentions are the difference between right and wrong. Iron Man is utilitarian. Everything is determined by the results. And what Coulson did was not good, because there was no chance of defeating Loki. He should not have done that. He should have done whatever led to the best result. This is Iron Man's whole framework for thinking through things. Results, results, results. And this is insufficient. What we really see is that Thor has an attenuated version of virtue ethics. My moral obligations, the moral requirements on my life are determined by my social role. That's what heroes do. And Iron Man has an attenuated utilitarianism. Do what leads to the greatest results. And concepts of duty don't even matter unless you're going to talk about our duty to bring about the best results. And Captain America has an attenuated deontology. Do your duty, follow orders, do what's right, die in the process if you must. That's cool. That's just fine. And I think what we see in these films, or at least what I'm hypothesizing that we see, is not only do we see these three characters coming together to form the core of people who are able to defend the Earth and indeed the entire universe from the menace of Thanos, we also see their ethical positions coming together. We see deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics coming together to the greater good of our moral understanding. We also see deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics coming together for a better deontology and a better utilitarianism and a better virtue ethics. Because remember, my hypothesis is Thor, at least originally, represents an attenuated, oversimplified version of virtue ethics. He's just got one or two concepts of virtue ethics. What's right? Well, it's what heroes do. I'm a hero. That's what I do. Captain America has an attenuated deontology. All he knows is do your duty. Iron Man has an attenuated utilitarianism. All he knows is aim for good results. Now, it's awfully oversimplified. He's missing everything else in John Stuart Mill. Mill didn't just give us that one sentence. So these characters come together, the ethics come together, and it results not in some irreconcilable conflict between different moral perspectives, which is how we sometimes think of the difference between virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarianism. What actually happens, I think, is we come to a better understanding of utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. We come to a better understanding of how to achieve happiness, how to achieve good results, how to follow our obligations, fulfill our duties, and how to function properly and fulfill our social roles. Let's look at a few pointers on how these traditions come together alongside the characters coming together over the course of these films. And let's just look at one example for each, and that means we need exactly 6. We need an example of Thor needing deontology and Thor needing utilitarianism, or Thor discovering deontology and discovering utilitarianism. And then we need an example of Iron Man discovering deontology, or Iron Man needing deontology, and then Iron Man for virtue ethics, then Captain America for virtue ethics, and Captain America for utilitarianism. So first, I would propose that in Endgame, Thor desperately needs deontology. He thinks what heroes do is they save the day by defeating the bad guy. I failed to kill Thanos. I'm a failure as a hero, and I've morally failed. He is literally depressed, and what he needs is the good old-fashioned Captain America-style deontology. You cannot fail if you've done your best and done your duty. He did his best. He did his duty. He fulfilled his obligations. He did not succeed in the attempt to defeat Thanos before Thanos destroyed everything, but he tried. And you can't be naive about doing your best, because you can't fail to do your best. If you do your best, you've done your best. If you didn't succeed at what you were doing when you did your best, that's okay, like Phil Coulson. Thor needs some of this deontology. It'll help him not be depressed about having failed to defeat Thanos the first time around. In Endgame, Iron Man goes deontological. So Thor needs deontology, And I hope he gets it. I think he probably does, but I'm just citing one or two pointers. He needs deontology. Now, Iron Man actually goes deontological. He's very attentive to his duties. He's not just giving the knee-jerk best results response he would probably have given some years before. He knows he has a duty to his wife. He knows he has a duty to his daughter. He knows he has a duty to all the people who were killed by Thanos. He has a duty to fight Thanos if he can. He has a duty to try, and he knows he might fail in trying. He might die in trying, but he knows he has to do it. This is a deontological style of thinking. Now, our characters, I think, also discover some virtue ethics. Let's do Iron Man. The whole story of Iron Man is a growth in character for Tony Stark. From the first Iron Man film to Avengers Endgame, everything is a growth in character. You know, you might, if you're strongly emphatic of Team Captain America in Captain America 3 Civil War, you might say that Stark's character is improving along both these films and takes a dive for a while, but, you know, it's like the stock market over time. Iron Man's character goes up. Iron Man's character improves over the course of this saga. And this is a virtue ethics thing. His character improves. He becomes more virtuous. He takes on virtues. He takes on the responsibilities of his role in society. And he becomes more wise, courageous. What are the cardinal virtues? Wisdom, courage, justice, moderation. He takes on the characteristics of justice, moderation, courage, wisdom, much more than he used to. The whole story is, as oversimplifications go, not so badly oversimplified by saying what happens in the Infinity Saga. Iron Man goes through a huge growth spurt in character over the course of these 20-something films. And I would suggest that in Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier, we have a really strong sense of virtue ethics involving Captain America. Now, I'm not sure this is a case of Captain America himself being virtue ethics, being a virtue ethicist, but everyone else is. It's beautiful. In virtue ethics, what you have in the question of what is right and wrong is pointing towards character. How do you know the difference between right and wrong? What's right is what a virtuous person does. And how do you know what's right in Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier? You don't do some analysis of the categorical imperative. You don't even talk about results. You know that what is right is what the virtuous person says. The virtuous person is Captain America. Captain's orders. That's how you know what's right. That is a virtue ethics style of thinking through right and wrong. Look to the moral exemplar. The moral exemplar is Captain America. And of course, Captain America also is a person of pretty solid moral character. So there's a strong virtue ethics understanding of Captain America, and I think you can say he also grows in character somewhat over the films. Thor in Endgame, I think, has a beautiful utilitarian moment. In fact, it may be a utilitarian moment as well as a deontological moment, a virtue ethics moment. Well, maybe we'll get back to that in a moment. Thor has a delightful utilitarian moment. Also, my favorite moment of the film is when Captain America picks up Mjolnir. You know, we knew this could happen. We knew Captain America was always the person who had the strongest case to being a virtuous person, you know. He has the strongest character, so it appears. So, of course, he's the only one besides Thor we ever saw able to even budge Mjolnir. Maybe Hela is an exception, but you know, that's because she's strong enough to match, maybe even overcome the magic of Odin that set this. Only the worthy of character can lift Mjolnir thing on the hammer. People who are not strong enough to resist or overcome that magic, or whatever it is Odin does, I'll call it magic. I think it's probably magic. People who don't have the power to resist that magic can only lift Mjolnir if they're worthy. And of course, Captain America is the only one we ever saw ever being able to do anything like that. He could budge Mjolnir in Age of Ultron, Avengers 2, Age of Ultron. And this is because Captain America always is the one with the strongest claim to being a person of virtuous character. At least that's what it looks like on the whole. Where am I going with this? Captain America finally lifts Mjolnir in Endgame. And What does Thor do? Thor shows he's delighted by this. Originally, Thor was a little concerned. Oh no, it looks like the captain budged Mjolnir. Oh no, am I not the only one worthy enough to wield this hammer in Ultron? But in this movie, he's just delighted that Captain America can lift Mjolnir. Why? Here's a reason. It's really good results. When Captain America can wield Mjolnir, then he has the power of Thor. He can use Mjolnir and lightning against Thanos. That's a really, really good thing. You really, really want Captain America, the super soldier, to be able to wield a big heavy hammer and lightning against Thanos, the greatest threat we've ever seen. That's a good result. Thor is happy about the results. I think this shows Thor is able to understand this particular insight from utilitarianism, that the results do matter. Now, Captain America is also interested in the results. I think two useful illustrations of this are in Avengers 1, Marvel's Avengers, and Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier. In both of these films, he understands that following your duty and following the rules blindly can lead to bad results, particularly when Hydra's infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and when S.H.I.E.L.D. is maybe working on some suspicious weapons that maybe aren't the best idea to be working on, and also they seem to be lying about what they're doing with the Tesseract. Captain America knows that following the rules blindly can lead to some bad results, so you have to think about the results. You have to possibly resist the duty that attaches to your position as a soldier and fulfill a different duty. Not that he's departing from Deontology here, because there's still a moral duty, to fight Hydra, even if that means defying the duty of following your higher-ups as a soldier who gave you particular orders. So I'm not saying he stops being a deontologist. I'm saying there is a utilitarian aspect to Captain America that's a little more vivid than may first appear. He aims at good results, and of course he's aiming at good results in Endgame. Now, let's say something about what I was just saying. Again, Captain America doesn't stop being a deontologist. He's still following his duty. As late as Endgame, he's still following his duty to treat all rational beings as ends in themselves, subject to respect and subject to protection from the likes of the evil Thanos. And even when he disobeys his orders, and, sneaks into the part of the helicarrier he wasn't supposed to go into and finds the weapons S.H.I.E.L.D. is developing in Marvel's Avengers, he's still following his duty to treat all rational beings as ends in themselves. And basically what he's doing here is not following an oversimplified deontology where everything reduces to do your duty and follow the rules. No, he's following a better deontology, where a better understanding of deontology, the kind you'll actually get if you study Kant properly, where the rules that should never be broken are the rules to always treat rational beings as ends in themselves, and follow the categorical imperative, and always follow moral law. These are the rules that should never be broken. And they may occasionally tell you to break certain other rules, like do what you're told by your superiors when you're a soldier. So I don't think he stops being a deontologist. His utilitarian moment is, in fact, a better expression of his deontology. And Iron Man doesn't stop being a utilitarian just because he grows in character and because he does his duty and cares about his obligations to wife, child, and the entirety of the world and the entirety of the universe. In fact, he's acting for the greater good, and he does what Mill would advise you to do. Sacrifice your own personal happiness if you must for the greater happiness of all. So what does he do? He literally kills himself. Or if you want to get technical, he gets himself killed as a side effect of defeating Thanos. But he lays down his life, Jesus-like. He lays down his life for the greater good. And Mill tells us this sort of thing is good. Have a disinterested analysis of your good versus the good of others, your happiness versus the happiness of others. Be disinterested, choose the greater happiness. And if the greater happiness is the happiness of others, sacrifice your own. He's following utilitarianism when he wields the new Infinity Gauntlet that he's made and defeats Thanos at the cost of his own life. And I don't think Thor stops being a virtue ethicist either. He just learns not to estimate his own worth in terms of his social roles alone. I think he still thinks character matters. He always understood that character matters. He always understood that there's a difference between his character and the character of Loki, or a difference between Captain America's character and the character of Loki, or the character of Thanos. He knows this. He still thinks character matters, but I think he's become a better virtue ethicist. He's not reducing the difference between right and wrong to the question: are you succeeding at fulfilling your social role? What do heroes do? They win the game. They win the day. They win the fight, save the day. That's what heroes do. That's what I must do. If I don't do it, I'm a moral failure. He learns to not think in these terms, but he still thinks character matters. And I think this is another reason he's happy that Captain America can wield Mjolnir, because he knows that this is a person of good character. I think he's still focused on virtue ethics. I think his utilitarian moments and his deontological moments have made him a better virtue ethicist. And I think Iron Man's deontological moments and his growth in character, his more virtuous side, have made him a better utilitarian. And I think Captain America is only a better deontologist because of his utilitarian aspects of looking at the results, and because of his good character, and I like to think his growth in character over the course of the films. Now, what does this all show? I don't know. It might show that this is the case and that it's cool and important. I hope it shows. I on the whole, prefer to be right rather than wrong in suggesting this hypothesis as a theory for interpreting the ethics of our trio at the heart of the Avengers. I would like to think that this is correct and insightful. I put it forward as a hypothesis only. There may be some interesting objections. I am more confident that this is important because it shows that you don't have to just choose between deontology, virtue ethics, utilitarianism, because you don't just have to choose between happiness, proper function of human beings, and character, and moral law and intentions, and results and happiness. These are the concepts that are emphasized by the different traditions, but nothing stops you from looking at all the concepts in a more thorough account of ethics. Now, it's true that everything Aristotle says, everything Kant says, everything Mill says are not exactly the same things, and that if you make a list of everything Kant says, everything Mill says, everything Aristotle says, a few points on the list here or there will conflict with other points. But I think there's a lot more potential to integrate these things. There's such a thing as a Kantian virtue ethics and so on. And if you study Kant and Mill and Aristotle long enough, I think you find Aristotle, though he emphasizes those concepts and uses them as a starting point in his study of ethics, does actually cover intentions and results. He covers everything Kant and Mill are talking about, except I think moral law. But he does cover obligations. And if you study Kant long enough, you'll find he does talk about happiness. He does talk about character. And Mill does talk about character and virtue. And Mill does talk about obligations. I think you'll find these concepts can be fit together more easily. And while I would be happy if this hypothesis that Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America represent these things, I'm much more happy in my confidence that these concepts, and hopefully if moral realism is the case, if there is such a thing as objective moral truth, which I think there is, if the realities that these philosophers like Aristotle, Kant, and Mill are mapping when they study ethics, if these realities are all real and can all fit together, if there really are such things as proper functions of human beings, as moral law, as happiness, and so on, if all these things are so, I'm much more happy with that thesis than I am with my hypothesis about Marvel Cinematic Universe.